I shouldn't have felt the sting, but I did. The clinking sound of my bank card as I swiped it for the third time this month. Each transaction to cover another bill they could have easily handled themselves. It should have been a simple task like always, but today it was different. Something felt heavier in the air, a weight pressing down on my chest. I stood there in the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the space, but the warmth of it didn't reach me. Instead, I felt numb. Have you ever been betrayed by those you trusted the most? Watch as one woman finally stands up for herself in this emotional revenge story. An escape from the quiet pain of family betrayal you can't afford to miss. Thanks again, Mom, came my daughter's voice breaking through the silence. I'm sure this will help with the rent for the new place. I nodded, managing a small smile. Of course, sweetheart. Anything for you. She left the room carrying her things, the usual routine. And as she disappeared through the door, I caught sight of the receipt in my hand. A constant reminder that I'd just handed over the last of the savings I'd been stashing away for myself. There it was again, the resentment. The knot that had been forming in my stomach for years was tighter than ever before. I never asked for much. Just a little respect. A little acknowledgement. But instead I was constantly the one giving, always the one who had to make sure everyone was comfortable, happy, and well provided for. And the worst part? They never even noticed. I could hear the hum of the washing machine in the background, the tick of the clock on the wall. But it was the quiet that consumed me. The suffocating silence that followed every time I handed over another check, every time I signed another paper, every time I sacrificed something for them. It wasn't the money. It was the principle. It was the way I had become invisible in my own home, my own life. It was no longer a choice. It felt like an obligation. Like they expected it, as if I didn't have the right to say no. To put myself first for once. But how could I say no? They were my family. My daughter. My sister. My mother. They needed me. But today something inside me snapped. I couldn't recall when it started. Perhaps it was the endless demands, the silent expectation that I would just continue to give without question. Or perhaps it was when I realized how much I had changed, how much I had become a different person for their sake. A person who never said no. A person who swallowed every bit of resentment, every ounce of anger, because family meant sacrifice. It meant giving without receiving. Right? The kettle whistled on the stove, breaking my trance. I felt like a stranger in my own body, like I had been watching someone else perform the same tired routine. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked over to the counter to pour the hot water into the mug. My hands shook just slightly, but it wasn't from the heat. It was from the thought that had been growing in my mind all morning. Like a seed that had finally sprouted. They had no idea what I was capable of. I stared down at the mug, watching the steam curl up, and for the first time in years I felt a strange calm. The rage I had been carrying for so long didn't seem so overwhelming anymore. It wasn't anger, it was something else. Something far colder, far more precise. And then as I set the mug down, a thought occurred to me. What if I stopped? What if I didn't do it anymore? The idea was terrifying, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. They had taken everything I had to give, and now they were taking the last piece of my dignity. No more. They would never know it was coming. They wouldn't even see it until it was too late. I had been a silent player in this game for far too long, always giving, always sacrificing. But the truth was, it wasn't about love anymore. It wasn't about family. It was about control. Their control over me, over my time, over my money, over my life. I had allowed it for so long because I was scared of the consequences of saying no. But now, I was done. The door to the living room creaked open, and I turned to see my daughter standing there, her face etched with the same worried look she always wore. Mom, I hope it's okay, but I need the money again this month. I didn't get the bonus I was hoping for, and rent's due soon. I paused, the words sitting on the tip of my tongue. How many times had I heard this? How many times had I said yes because I couldn't bear to see her struggle, to see her disappointed? But this time I didn't say anything right away. I simply looked at her, my gaze steady. You know, sweetheart, I began, my voice calm but with a quiet firmness I hadn't known I possessed. You never ask me how I'm doing. You never ask if I can afford to give. It's always assumed. Always expected. Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise flashing across her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. I wasn't finished. Do you ever think about what I need? Or is it just about what you want? She looked taken aback, as if my words had hit her harder than she expected. I could see the guilt creeping in, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her. It was about me, about what I had allowed for so long. And for the first time, I wasn't going to apologize for it. I'm tired, sweetheart. I'm tired of being the one who gives, the one who sacrifices. And I'm done. She stared at me for a long moment, as though she couldn't comprehend what I was saying. And maybe she couldn't. Maybe none of them could. They'd never stopped to look at me, really look at me and see how much I had given. And now I was too tired to care. I'm sorry, Mom, she muttered, and for a brief second I saw her look guilty, even sad. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I turned away, my hand gripping the back of the chair for support. I wasn't sure what I was expecting from her. Maybe an apology. Maybe a promise that things would change. But deep down I knew she would never understand until it was too late. The tension in the room was thick, the silence stretching between us like a rope about to snap. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a steady rhythm that matched the cold certainty settling in my bones. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had made up my mind. You'll be fine, I said quietly, my voice steady. You always are. And with that I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there alone with her thoughts. I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't answer. The moment had passed. The choice had been made. And as I walked down the hall, I realized something. The silence between us wasn't just a quiet pause. It was the beginning of something new. Something they would never expect. For the first time in years I was doing something for myself. Something that didn't involve sacrifice. Something that didn't require me to give everything away. And I had no intention of ever going back. I stood in the kitchen, the half-empty mug of coffee in my hands, staring at nothing. The room seemed too quiet, too still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slowly suffocating me. I had given everything. Every dollar, every hour, every ounce of energy had gone into keeping them comfortable. But where had it gotten me? In the same spot I'd always been, stuck in a life that wasn't my own, pretending everything was fine while slowly dying inside. The silence stretched between us like a suffocating blanket. I had been giving for so long that I couldn't even remember a time when it had felt like a choice. But it hadn't always been this way. There was a time when I felt needed, when my love and care had been appreciated. But somewhere along the way everything had shifted. The giving had become expected. The gratitude had faded, replaced by entitlement. And now, every sacrifice I made felt like another layer of shackles being added to my ankles. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background, the ticking of the clock on the wall. But it was the faint sound of footsteps approaching that made my pulse quicken. I didn't need to turn around to know it was my daughter. Her footsteps were soft, tentative, like she knew something was off. She always knew when I was upset, but I had trained myself to hide it well. Today, though, I couldn't keep the calm facade intact. Mom. Her voice was tentative, and I could hear the concern in it. She didn't get it. She never had. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The words that were swirling in my head felt too raw, too dangerous. If I said them out loud, I didn't know what would happen. Would she cry? Would she be angry? Would she apologize? I didn't know if I wanted any of those things anymore. I wasn't sure what I wanted. I slowly placed the mug on the counter and turned to face her. Her eyes were wide with that familiar worried look she always wore when she thought something was wrong. Mom, what's going on? I swallowed hard, trying to steady the wave of emotion that was threatening to choke me. I had spent my entire life making sure everything ran smoothly, that no one ever saw my cracks. But now those cracks were impossible to ignore. The dam had broken and there was no turning back. Nothing's going on, I said, forcing the words out as calmly as I could. Just tired, I guess. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, the way she tilted her head, the way her lips parted as if she wanted to ask more, but wasn't sure if she should. I didn't blame her. I had taught her to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation, to always do what was expected of us. We both had. Mom, she said softly, her voice almost pleading. You've been like this for weeks now. What's really going on? I felt my chest tighten, my heart pounding in my ears. She didn't understand. She couldn't. All these years I had sacrificed so much for her, for this family. And for what? What had I gotten in return? Thank you here and there, a pat on the back, but nothing real. Nothing that made me feel seen, appreciated. And now, here I was, pouring my heart out to a woman who had taken more than she knew without even realizing it. You don't see it, do you? I heard the words leave my mouth before I could stop them. I didn't mean to say it, didn't mean to let the anger slip through, but there it was, raw and unfiltered. All this time you've been taking and I've been giving. And I don't have anything left to give. I'm empty. Her face froze, shock washing over her features like a sudden storm. She blinked, clearly struggling to understand. I hadn't meant to go this far, hadn't meant to make her feel guilty, but it was too late now. I had said it and it hung in the air like a dark cloud. "What are you talking about, Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling with confusion. "I don't take anything from you. You've always been there for me." "I've always been there," I repeated, my voice soft but bitter. "But when was the last time you thought about what I needed? When was the last time you asked if I was okay, if I could afford to keep helping you?" Her eyes widened with realization. "Mom, I never." "Exactly," I cut her off, my voice sharper than I intended. "You never thought about it. You've been so caught up in your own life that you haven't noticed how much I've given up. How much I've sacrificed. For you. For this family. And I'm not going to do it anymore." She stepped back, visibly taken aback by my words, as if they had physically struck her. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the guilt creeping into her expression, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the years of resentment I had carried in silence. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice almost pleading. "I didn't mean for it to be like this. I'm sorry." I shook my head. Sorry isn't enough anymore. I've spent my whole life being sorry for things I didn't do. For things I shouldn't have done. But not anymore. I'm done. She opened her mouth to say something, but I could see that she didn't know what to say. What could she say? She wasn't ready for this, wasn't prepared to hear that her mother, the woman who had always been there, was finally done. She didn't know what it meant for me to stop, for me to pull away, for me to take back everything I had given. I could feel my hands trembling at my sides and I quickly wiped them on my jeans, trying to hide the vulnerability I felt. It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about the sacrifices or the endless work I had done for them. It was about the fact that I had never been allowed to take care of myself. I had never been allowed to be seen. I had been invisible for too long and I couldn't stand it anymore. "I'm leaving," I said quietly, the words feeling final, like the closing of a chapter one never thought I would finish. "I need to find myself again. I need to remember who I am without being anyone's caretaker, without being anyone's savior." Her expression crumpled as if I had physically struck her. "Mom, please don't say that. I don't want you to leave." But I wasn't leaving just yet. I was just walking away. Walking away from the expectations. Walking away from the constant demand for sacrifice. I was going to find myself again, piece by piece, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. "Goodbye, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice steady despite the torrent of emotion crashing inside me. "I'll be back when I'm ready. But right now I need this." And with that I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there trying to process what had just happened. The silence in the house was deafening now, and I realized for the first time how long it had been since I had truly felt alive. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I wasn't sure what I would find when I walked away from everything I had known. But I knew this. Whatever came next, I was finally doing it for me. And that was something I hadn't done in years. I barely slept that night. The bed felt too big, too empty, and the silence that surrounded me felt more suffocating than comforting. For years, I had lived with the quiet hum of everyday life. The noise of the television, the sound of the kids coming and going, the clatter of dishes, the constant demands of family. But now, in the stillness of my own home, I was finally alone with my thoughts. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel them. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything I had just said hanging heavy in the air. I could still see the shock on my daughter's face, the hurt in her eyes as I walked away, leaving her standing there speechless. The words had been out of my mouth before I could stop them. But now, in the quiet of my room, I wasn't sure if I regretted them or not. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living this way. I had been a caretaker for so long that I didn't know how to be anything else. I had put everyone's needs before my own, sacrificed my time, my energy, my money, and for what? To be invisible? To feel like I was nothing more than a bank account and a warm body in the background? No. I couldn't do it anymore. I needed something for myself. I needed to remember who I was before I became someone else's lifeline. I reached over to the nightstand, my fingers brushing against the cool wood as I grabbed my phone. The soft glow of the screen lit up the room and I hesitated for a moment. I had no plan, not really. Just a thought. A fleeting idea that had been quietly growing in my mind for the last few days. A desire for something different. Something that wasn't defined by my family, by their needs. I opened my bank app and stared at the balance for a moment. Enough. Just enough. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference. Enough to take a step, to get away, to breathe without the constant weight of responsibility. I needed to take this small piece of what I had left and use it for myself. I had earned it. Or at least I had convinced myself I had. I quickly typed in the details for a flight. To Italy. A place I'd always dreamed of visiting but never had the chance. Maybe it was silly to think I could just pick up and go like that, but it didn't feel silly in the moment. It felt like freedom. Like reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried under years of doing for others. I booked the ticket. One way. The word confirmation flashed on the screen, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I took a deep breath. I could feel the tension in my shoulders loosen just a little. But there was no time to bask in the relief. I couldn't let myself get comfortable. There was still so much to do. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake anyone. The house was still quiet, too quiet. I moved through the halls like a ghost, my movements slow, deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might hear me, might find out what I was doing. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. That I wasn't planning something. That I wasn't planning to leave. I made my way to the kitchen, the soft glow of the moonlight casting shadows across the counter. I ran my fingers over the edges of the counter, my mind racing. There was so much to consider. So many details to sort through. How would I explain this? How could I explain this? But I wasn't sure that I owed anyone an explanation anymore. I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, my hands shaking slightly as I wrote down a list of things I needed to take care of before I left. The flight. The money. My credit cards. I couldn't just leave everything behind without taking some precautions. If I was going to do this, I had to do it right. The list seemed small at first, but as I kept writing, it grew longer. Call the bank. Transfer some money into an account they didn't know about. Hide some cash in a safe place. Pack light, just the essentials. Make sure the house looked like I had simply gone for a short trip, so no one would suspect anything was amiss. I paused for a moment, staring at the list, feeling the weight of it settle on my chest. This wasn't just a trip. It was a break. A break from them. From everything. It was my chance to step out of the role I had played for so long and finally find out who I was outside of being a mother, a daughter, a caretaker. But there was something else I had to consider. How would my daughter react when she found out? How long would it take before she realized that I wasn't coming back? I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt at the thought. She needed me, didn't she? But I had given her everything I had. And what had it gotten me? A relationship built on obligation, not love. The guilt gnawed at me, but I shoved it aside. I couldn't let it stop me. Not this time. Not when I had finally made up my mind. I moved to the closet, pulling out a suitcase. It felt strange to be packing for myself, to be thinking about what I needed instead of what everyone else needed. But I wasn't going to overthink it. I folded a few clothes, grabbing only what I knew I'd use. There was no room for excess anymore. No room for anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. As I packed, my mind wandered back to the family I was leaving behind. My daughter. My sister. My mother. What would they say when they realized I was gone? What would they think? I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts. This wasn't about them. It was about me. The final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. I made sure my phone was fully charged, packed my passport, grabbed the money I had set aside, and slipped it all into my bag. I didn't need anything else. Nothing more than what I could carry. I was leaving the rest behind, leaving the expectations, the guilt, the weight of years of sacrifice. I stood there looking at the suitcase, my heart pounding in my chest. Was I really doing this? Was I really going to walk away from everything I had ever known? But the answer was simple. Yes. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself. It was terrifying. It was painful. But it was also the only thing that felt right. I took one last look around the room, the house, the life I had built. It had been my world for so long. But now it felt like a cage. And I was breaking free. I walked quietly down the hallway, the suitcase rolling softly behind me. The house was still asleep, but in my heart, I felt a strange mix of peace and exhilaration. I was doing it. I was finally doing something for me. I opened the front door, stepping out into the cool night air. The street was dark, empty. The world felt quiet. For the first time, I wasn't bound by anyone's needs but my own. And as I walked down the path, the weight of the past few days slowly began to lift. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time I didn't care. I was finally free. The sound of my suitcase rolling over the cracked pavement was the only noise that accompanied me as I stepped out into the cool night air. It was strange how quiet the world felt at that moment. Not just the outside world but the world inside me too. My heart beat steadily, not with the frantic thumping of anxiety, but with a quiet determination. I had made my decision and now there was no turning back. I didn't know what I expected to feel as I crossed the threshold, leaving behind everything I had known, everything that had kept me tethered to a life of obligation and sacrifice. Freedom maybe. But it wasn't the rush of liberation I had imagined. Instead, there was a hollow sort of peace, a calm that made me feel like I was walking in the middle of a dream. Everything felt surreal, as if the world had slowed down just to watch me take this first step. I walked down the driveway, the path lit only by the dim streetlights that flickered faintly in the distance. There was no one around to witness my departure, no one to stop me, no one to call after me. And yet, I felt an odd emptiness, like something was missing, even though I was doing exactly what I had dreamed of for so long. I hadn't told anyone, not even my closest friends. How could I explain it? The years of quiet resentment, the way I had allowed myself to become invisible, to live in the shadows of everyone else's lives. It wasn't just the money or the sacrifices. It was the way my entire existence had been consumed by the needs of others. My daughter, my sister, my mother. And in the process I had lost myself. But now I was finally taking myself back. I glanced at my phone, checking the time. The flight was in a few hours and the airport was a long drive away, but there was something else I had to do first. It was a small thing, really. A final act of silence, something I could leave behind so that no one would question where I had gone, why I had left. I stopped at the end of the driveway and looked back at the house. It stood there, quiet and unassuming, the same house I had lived in for decades. It had been a home once. A place filled with laughter, with the noise of family dinners and birthday celebrations. But now it felt foreign. Like a cage. I could feel my heart tugging as I stood there, looking at the familiar front door. Was I really leaving? Was I really ready to walk away from everything I had worked so hard for? The doubt crept in, but I pushed it away. I had spent too many years doubting myself, letting others dictate my life. Not anymore. I turned around, the weight of my suitcase dragging on the ground as I walked toward the car. The drive to the airport was long, and the silence in the car seemed to stretch on forever. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want to fill the space with distractions. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to be alone with my thoughts. The city lights blurred as I drove, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The world outside felt like a dream, a blurry haze of motion. I passed the same familiar streets, the same shops, the same places I had driven by 1,000 times, but tonight they all seemed distant. Nothing felt familiar anymore, not the streets, not the neighborhood, not even the people I had known all my life. It was as if I was leaving not just a house behind, but an entire life. As I pulled up to the airport, I took a deep breath. The bustling crowds and the bright lights of the terminal were a stark contrast to the quiet of the night. But as I walked inside, the noise seemed to fade away, as if the world had turned its attention to me, to this moment. I stood in line at the check-in counter, my heart still pounding, but this time with excitement, not fear. It was strange. I had imagined this moment so many times, but it was nothing like I had expected. There was no dramatic scene, no tears, no big farewell. It was just me standing there alone with nothing but a suitcase and a one-way ticket. The attendant handed me my boarding pass and I couldn't help but feel a small flutter of triumph. This was it. My escape. I was finally free. I walked to the gate, my footsteps echoing on the tile floor. The airport felt like a different world, one I didn't quite belong to. The people around me were strangers, all going somewhere, all on their own journeys. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel out of place. I felt like I had finally found a piece of myself that had been missing for so long. As I sat in the waiting area, I watched the other passengers as they rushed around, some talking excitedly, others checking their watches nervously. No one seemed to notice me, no one looked twice. And that was exactly how I wanted it. No one here knew who I was. No one here knew what I was leaving behind. I thought about the family I was leaving behind, The daughter I had always cared for, the sister I had always tried to protect, the mother who had never seen me for anything more than a source of support. What would they think when they realized I was gone? Would they even notice? Or would they just go on with their lives as they always had? The thought stung, but I quickly pushed it away. I couldn't afford to dwell on that now. I couldn't afford to think about the people I was leaving behind, the guilt that was creeping in, threatening to undo everything I had just done. I had spent so many years living for everyone else. For once, I was living for me. The announcement for my flight came over the loudspeaker and I stood up, gathering my things. The weight of my suitcase felt lighter now somehow. As I walked down the jet bridge to the plane, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. There was no turning back now. The flight was smooth, and as the plane lifted off the ground, I looked out the window, watching as the city I had known for so long disappeared beneath the clouds. It was like saying goodbye to an old friend, one who had taken far too much from me. But as the plane soared higher, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I didn't know what awaited me in Italy. I didn't know what I would find when I finally stepped off that plane. But I knew this. I was finally taking the first step towards something new. Something just for me. And for the first time in my life that felt like enough. The silence was deafening now, louder than any noise could ever be. The absence of my presence would be felt, but not immediately. The emptiness would settle over them like a thick fog, and when they finally noticed, it would be too late. They would never understand. They would never know the weight of the years I had spent giving, never see the sacrifices that had chipped away at me little by little. But that was okay. Because in that silence, in that sudden absence, I was reclaiming the one thing I had lost. Myself. And maybe, just maybe, they would finally understand when it was too late to ask why. As the plane descended into Rome, my pulse quickened, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something else. Something raw and primal. I wasn't sure if it was the excitement of what awaited me or the weight of what I had just left behind. Both felt heavy in different ways, like two opposing forces battling for my attention. My hands gripped the armrests tightly, my knuckles pale, my body restless. There was no turning back now. The life I had spent so many years building was gone. And in its place there was only the promise of something different. I had done it. I had walked away. And as the city spread out below me like a patchwork quilt of ancient buildings and winding streets, I realized something. I wasn't just walking away from them, from my family, from my past. I was walking toward myself. Toward a version of me I had forgotten existed. A version that had been buried under years of silence, of sacrifice, of expectation. And I wasn't going to apologize for it. The cabin lights flickered as the seatbelt sign came on. My stomach fluttered with nervous energy, but there was no dread now, no anxiety. Just the calm, steady beat of a heart that was no longer afraid to be itself. The plane touched down with a soft jolt, and I felt the strange exhilaration of arriving somewhere completely new, completely untethered. I had no itinerary, no plan beyond simply being. Simply existing. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. As I stepped off the plane, the cool air of the Italian night wrapped around me like a welcome embrace. It was late, but the streets of Rome were still alive, the sound of laughter and chatter floating in the air. The city felt different from anything I had ever known. It felt free. I wasn't sure what I expected when I came here. Maybe some grand revelation, a sudden epiphany about who I was or what I was supposed to be. But all I felt in that moment was the weight of the past slipping away from me. I took a deep breath, inhaling the unfamiliar scents, the smoky aroma of food from nearby cafes, the sweet, earthy undertones of freshly cut flowers. There was something about being in a place that wasn't mine that felt like a second chance, a fresh start. I didn't know anyone here. No one had expectations of me. No one was waiting for me to fix their problems or carry their burdens. It was just me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what to do with that. I hailed a cab to take me to a small guest house I had found online. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed. I didn't want luxury or comfort. I just wanted solitude. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts without the noise of anyone else's life drowning me out. As we drove through the narrow streets, I watched the city unfold outside the window. The cobblestone roads, the ivy-clad walls of buildings, the distant hum of music spilling from hidden courtyards. It all felt like a secret. A secret that had been waiting for me to discover it. The cab stopped in front of the guest house and I paid the driver, my hands shaking slightly as I handed over the money. This was real. I was here. I was really here. I grabbed my suitcase from the trunk, feeling its weight in my hands as I walked up to the door. The guest house was small, quaint, with a rustic charm. A far cry from the sterile, polished life I had left behind. The door clicked open and the smell of lavender and old wood greeted me. The room was simple but cozy. A small bed, a wooden desk, a window that looked out over a narrow street. It was perfect. It was everything I needed. I set my suitcase down and stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The quiet. The stillness. The feeling of being completely alone with no one to answer to but myself. It was intoxicating. But as the hours passed and the night deepened, the weight of everything I had left behind settled in. My family. My daughter. My sister. My mother. They were all still there, in that house, in that life, and they would have no idea where I was. They would wake up in the morning and find me gone. No note. No explanation. Just the silence. The silence I had lived with for so long. The thought made my chest tighten, but I pushed it away. I couldn't do this for them anymore. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself until there was nothing left. I had given them everything I had. My time, my energy, my money. And what had I gotten in return? A life that wasn't mine. A life that had been defined by their needs, their expectations. I didn't owe them an explanation. Not anymore. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the years I had spent caring for them, the sacrifices I had made. I thought about the times my daughter had called, asking for help, the times my sister had relied on me, the times my mother had never seen me for anything other than a lifeline. I had given everything I had, and for what? To be taken for granted? To be invisible? No. I was done. The next morning I woke up early as the sun filtered through the window, casting soft light over the room. I had no plans for the day. No responsibilities, no obligations. Just me and the open city. But as I stood at the window looking out over the street, a thought crossed my mind. A quiet, unsettling thought. What if they never noticed? What if they just went on with their lives, oblivious to the fact that I had left? It stung, but it was the truth. They would go on. They would move forward without me. The realization was sharp, like a slap to the face. I wasn't sure what I had expected. Maybe some grand realization from them that I had been the one holding everything together. But no. They would never understand. They would never see me for who I was, not until it was too late. And that was when I realized the truth. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for me. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. I was stepping away from the role I had been forced into, the role that had drained me for so long. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming what was mine. My life. My identity. My freedom. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. I hesitated for a moment before answering. It was my daughter. Mom. Her voice sounded distant, strained. Are you there? We've been trying to reach you. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I hadn't planned on talking to her so soon, but there it was. The reality of it all. I'm here, I said, my voice calm but firm. But I'm not coming back. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the quiet crackle of the connection. What do you mean? Where are you? Why didn't you tell us? Because I don't owe you an explanation anymore, I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. I've spent my life taking care of everyone else. It's time I take care of myself. Another pause, and then her voice came through, quieter now. Mom, please. We need you. I know, I said softly, my heart heavy. But I need me too. And then without another word, I hung up. I set the phone down on the small wooden table by the window, my hands trembling slightly. I had said what needed to be said. And now I was free. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. And it was the most powerful feeling I had ever known. As I stood by the window watching the morning light spill across the cobblestone streets, I realized something. This was what freedom felt like. Not the absence of guilt. Not the absence of responsibility. But the absence of regret. And that in itself was enough. If you felt the sting of betrayal and the power of reclaiming your life, subscribe now. Join our community for more intense, emotional stories about revenge, self-worth, and family drama. Stories that will keep you hooked from start to finish.